other indirect effects. So please let me conclude by repeating myself. It is very important for the decision makers in this room to consider the overall general equilibrium effects of the changes that is happening in the economy. Right? And I can tell you now, if decisions made here do not help the financial sustainability and security of a large entity like Eskom, we're going to be most likely heading to another credit rating downgrade, and that is going to be very, very bad news for the country overall. Right? And again, we've seen it in some of the recent years' economic performances from previous downgrades. So the sovereign credit rating of a country is such an important variable to protect. And whichever way we find to do that, the most optimal way is perhaps a combination of giving Eskom higher prices, improving their efficiency all the time, whatever it takes. We have to protect our credit rating in the process. I think that's it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dr. Bowman, for the presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Dr. Bowman. I think perhaps the easy question first. I think it would be useful if you were able to share some of these studies that you say you've done. And I'm hoping that you've done research modeling based on the current, I think, application by Eskom. If you have, that would be very useful. For me, the one question that I still battle with is why you're ignoring this first issue of what the cost should be. I know you're saying separately. Why is it that you should ignore the answer to the initial questions? Because that's where some of the solutions should be coming from. If you take into account the fact that we operate in an environment where Eskom is a dominant player, so the market doesn't allow you to set the correct prices. So all those, the normal market equilibrium that you talk about, mainly on the energy side, energy pricing and consumption side, if they're not there, surely our role is to go and say, we need the licensee like Eskom to be generating this electricity at a certain cost. To the extent that that cost is exceeded, the starting point in avoiding this downgrade, surely that has to be to reduce cost, because we're starting from a premise that the costs are there. So I'm saying, if you're saying reduce the costs, then that also assists with the downgrade. So I guess my question, to be very clear, is why is the public, why is industry, why is the regulator, the saying we need to make sure that the costs are efficiently incurred? Why should that be not the starting point in addressing this credit rating problem that you raised?
Thank you, Chairperson. Now that it has noting also the previous presentation from the academic, I was expecting maybe more in terms of specific proposals as to what needs to be done in terms of the application that is before us. The issues that you are mentioning, definitely they are being taken
into consideration. It's been more of an awareness raising presentation than really dealing with trying to pinpoint a specific decision to take. So I think it will help if you can provide better information and maybe whatever analysis that you have done to the eligible data, so that we can maybe based on that the team will try to and get to the information that we need. Because one should reconsider the fact that the tariff alone is not going to provide the solutions to the problems faced by us. But at some stage, there is some kind of an optimal point that we need to look into in the context of the framework, as well as the overall impact on the social side as well as the economic side. So I will just stop it at that and say, please just provide information that will be able to assist us in addressing what is before us. The rest will also be help of looking at your
Can you please provide a specific response to that first question about why only considering the credit rating and not efficiencies, in particular cost efficiencies by ESCOM to assist with that consent on the credit ratings, and perhaps to also indicate whether the credit rating aspect, is it a factor in terms of our legal mandate that is in the Electricity Regulations Act?
All right, I might have to come back on that second question. I'll try and deal with the first one. To be fair, us academics have the boring job of only being able to check one thing at a time and analyzing it as such. So the testing a particular scenario relative to the baseline has to be the starting point. You can only check one thing at a time, otherwise if multiple things are changing, then of course you don't know what's really causing what. So of course on the issue is, if we were to model a scenario, and we have done this, where you have effectively a productivity increase in ESCOM, right? Of course it will lead to cheaper outcomes, right? And it will reduce whatever increased burden on the price side you may think is required to balance the books. So the information I don't have, and I don't think anyone has this, is to what extent do the plans we have or what we are trying to do, to what extent exactly will that lead to a productivity increase or a cost side reduction? So it will be a very hypothetical scenario, a real what-if scenario for me to go and say, all right, if productivity, essentially input cost relative to output, is reduced by 1% or 5% or 10%, we can model that very easily and then provide that evidence, but we don't know what it will take to achieve the 1 or 5 or 10% productivity increase. Because we may throw a lot of resources and plans at something and only achieve a 3% improvement in productivity where we were hoping for 5 or 10. So those are always, when we are modeling, in very hypothetical scenarios, real what-if scenarios. But of course, it goes without saying that if we improve on the productivity side and cut certain costs or whatever it is economically and politically and financially viable, then yes, it will help. And that's why it makes it so difficult for me to stand here and say the price increase should be 14% or 7% or whatever, because it's contingent on all these outcomes.
Okay, the question is going to be answered. We want to ask the question why the reduction in cost is not a factor to be considered.
No, I wasn't saying that at all. I was just saying I didn't model that explicitly because it is such a what-if scenario.
Yes, it's clarified. Right, and then there was a second question on the background information to the study of the modeling that you've done. Are you willing to provide that, to share that study so that we can understand these findings and the concerns?
I did those, initially I did that work for clients. I'll perhaps just have to check that. I'm not sure about confidentialities or legalities or whatever, but wherever possible, I'm all for transparency, so I'd be happy to if possible.
All right, no problem there. We thank you very much for your views as well as your time. Thank you very much. We're moving on to the next presenter, Sakeli, or Sakeli. Daniel, please proceed. Mr. University. Please raise your right hand, sir. Do you solemnly declare that the information of the facts that you are going to present here will be the truth and the whole truth?
I swear.
Right. Please state your full name and your designation as Sakeli.
Certainly. My name is Daniel Frederick Duplessis, and I represent Sakeli, which is an independent business community.
That's it.
Thank you, Chair.
Ladies and gentlemen, good day. Sakeli is an independent business community comprising of more than 12,500 members across various sectors of the South African economy. We appreciate the opportunity to provide you our input and concerns in respect of Eskom's multi-year price determination application for allowable revenue of 290, 252 and 290. Actually, this was amended, I believe, very recently this morning. So, in any case, we're very much pleased to be here, and we thank you for the opportunity. This revenue application, as you are no doubt well aware, amounts to a year-on-year increase of approximately 15%, again, now amended. Before amendment, this came down to an effective increase of about 50%, and I believe it's still more or less in that range, though of course a little bit higher. This follows on substantial increases in the price of electricity, which was felt by most consumers in South Africa, including Sakeli members in the SME market. So our concern, I will set out the reasons for our concerns in full detail very shortly, but in the first instance, a short summary of our arguments might be called for. It goes without saying that Sakeli's members are deeply concerned about the impact of higher electricity tariffs. Obviously, high input costs will put many businesses, including our members, under pressure. Considering the current economic state of affairs, many businesses are operating on the margin of profitability. Members will maybe be forced to close their businesses if the situation worsens. The effect of these electricity increases will be felt in a number of industries. Sakeli believes that Eskom's business model is fundamentally unsustainable. This poses a serious risk to the continued prosperity and stability of the South African social order, a contention we think is largely uncontroversial. There is little reason to repeat the litany of complaints against the applicant, as I'm sure the board is by now well aware of the many allegations of alleged inefficiencies and the failure of oversight, which has plagued the utility on many occasions. Sakeli believes that the high tariff increases will allow Eskom's inefficient business model to persist, which will hamper much needed reforms in the electricity sector. Contrary to what some have argued, however, Sakeli believes the problem does not lie so much with management as with the way in which the electricity sector in South Africa has been structured. Without urgent reform, not only of Eskom, but of the way in which power is supplied to South Africans, we risk serious danger to the South African economy as a whole. To this end, I intend to present a two-part submission to the board today. In the first instance, I intend to illustrate why the situation is fundamentally unsustainable. We argue this based on a concern that following this, I intend to argue that this reform, urgently needed, can be begun in this forum at the level of rate determinations. I will begin with my first decision. I wasn't pressing, but I didn't actually have slides for that specific section, but I will try to be attentive to that. Thank you so much. In any case, I will begin with my first assertion, namely that Eskom's business model is unsustainable. The way that electricity is presently being supplied into South Africa just cannot continue to be the case. We argue this based on a concern that sensitivity to Eskom's price increases is being underestimated. In technical terms, that the demand for Eskom's product may be growing increasingly elastic. While Eskom does admit that higher prices will mean fewer end users and less electricity used by these end users, it is likely to be underestimating this effect. This is due to the fact that end users increasingly have more reasons and incentives to avoid dependence on Eskom's electricity provision, and indeed, more ways of doing so. The demand for electricity is a function of, firstly, the will to buy the product, and secondly, the means to buy the product. Given the history of electricity interruptions and perceived uncertainty about Eskom's ability to supply that electricity, in our estimation, the demand for Eskom's product is being eroded. And so while there might be a certain fixedness of demand with regards to electricity generally, there are other alternatives becoming increasingly available. Depending solely on Eskom for electricity is risky for businesses and aggravating to consumers. It is becoming increasingly common that end users, residential and commercial, consider and implement alternatives wherever economical. As rates go up, using alternatives or managing usage becomes smarter and smarter. As prices go up, many customers will also become less and less willing to pay. Please note that alternatives need not include grid-based electricity supply. Many alternative products are increasingly entering the market. When we consider the growing number of these alternatives and the increasing feasibility of these alternatives, such as small-scale solar, we note that competition with Eskom's product is intensifying. Whereas the total demand for electricity indeed does exist, it can no longer be assumed that the demand is solely for Eskom's product. In short then, we expect a greater sensitivity to price increases, and that means, in practice, a more elastic demand, and a greater sensitivity than Eskom might be anticipating. So what effect will this have on Eskom's business model? A greater sensitivity to tariff increases would mean that the hefty increases could result into greater decreases in Eskom sales volumes than it is presently being anticipated. If our contention proves correct, Eskom will struggle to earn even the allowable revenue it is applying for. This means that hefty tariff increases may actually undermine Eskom's own business model. If price increases result in weaker revenues, it may lead to even higher and increasingly unsustainable debt levels at Eskom, which stood at nearly 390 billion in the financial year 2018. Eskom's debt, as we know, represents a serious risk to the fiscus as a whole. Furthermore, higher prices may further worsen Eskom's debtors book and solidifies a culture of non-payment at various municipalities where a trend of escalating debt is seen. Now, I've sketched the problem. The problem is quite simply that the system is not sustainable. And while Eskom's business model might not be sustainable, it might be that the entire sector, as it is structured at present, is unsustainable as well. Now, of course, this board has a very limited mandate in making a determination with regards to multi-year price determination. So what can it do about this situation? Because clearly, just remain within the bounds of the current system is unlikely to give relief. So it should be abundantly clear that permitting the current state of affairs to continue is fundamentally in violation of the spirit of our constitutional order and contrary to the interests of all people in South Africa. The only real solution would be, most probably, very drastic and radical, and would entail radical reform of electricity provision in South Africa, with changes to legislation and our culture of governance, to open up electricity provision to the private sector in a way that makes use of market principles, or at least mirrors them as closely as possible. This point should not be by any means controversial. In fact, the Department of Energy has already moved in this direction with its Independent Power Producers Program. This program is, however, woefully insufficient, largely because these so-called independent power producers are still forced to sell their electricity through Eskom. How, after all, can IPPs compete against a company that is designed and designated in law as their sole customer? For all its noble intentions, the IPP program is likely to amount to nothing more than another inefficient and bureaucratic tender process. Even in the current circumstances, the best solution would be to promote IPPs selling their electricity directly to municipalities. Why not have them compete against one another and against Eskom to provide end users with competitive prices, more stability, and better service? While many legislative changes would be desirable for this in the future, we believe this particular arrangement is already possible. For instance, in terms of Section 34 of the Electricity Regulation Act, it is incumbent upon the Minister of Energy to mandate the purchase of electricity. Crucially, the Minister is empowered to mandate such a provision by any person or entity. By the context of this provision, we can start moving and improving the situation almost immediately. Private power producers can be invited to tender directly to municipalities, and with the cheapest and best bids being selected, the Minister may then be called upon to approve the purchase in terms of the Act. These public hearings could be a crucial first step in achieving this goal. This board is empowered to set rates which will not only block Eskom from concluding additional agreements with IPPs, but could also incentivize the Minister to make adequate use of these powers already granted to him in existing legislation. Considering how closely linked Eskom's debt is to government finance, you would be well advised to take careful note of your decision and your reason for doing so. In conclusion then, SARCLICA is of the opinion that further increases amounting to, and this again has been amended, 17.1% for this first instance, would be harmful to the economy, our members, and even to Eskom's own business model. We request Nersa not to raise tariffs, but to even consider tariff reductions. But to what end? So as to ensure that further increases will not shield Eskom from much needed market contestability and competitive forces. Further increases will also sustain and solidify Eskom's inefficient business model, and further increases will harm the economy by raising the cost of energy inputs. In addition, and this is a crucial addition without which the system just won't work in the first instance, SARCLICA requests the board with entrance of 2019 to make it clear to Eskom and the Minister that the current situation will not be permitted to continue. This board should refuse to make any provision for additional IPP arrangements through Eskom. And that, in short, is our submission.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Check if the members have questions. Stefan.
Thanks. More a request than a question. You spoke about increasing price elasticity, and you've given us some of the high-level stuff. You have 12,000 odd members. Would you be able to provide us any hard data in terms of, what is the current consumption levels and what might they go down or up depending on where the tariff goes?
So this is a very challenging proposition.
Can you please take down the question? Okay, please. Is there any question from the side? Mr.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thanks for the presentation. In line with what you stated that the negative impact of Eskom price increases is largely underestimated. So the request that you provide your own estimation just to make a change. Thank you.
All right, so the question really is on the demand elasticity analysis, the data that backs up this finding. So if you could provide us with that economic analysis and the data that gives rise to this finding. And then also, if you could elaborate on the issue of willingness to buy and the affordability support, the means to buy. So if you could provide us with additional information on those two as well, to see if then we've got those specific industries or customers that have shown willingness to buy even at a higher price, or they are able or can afford and absorb that price. So those will be the two additional information that I'm requesting from you.
Okay, will that be all? Okay. So in regards to the willingness to buy and the elasticity models, I think the key problem we need to consider here, and we would be willing to make a written submission which sets out our position in greater detail. It is quite involved and it is difficult to fully iterate it in this limited space and time. So if the board is willing, we will make that submission. But summarized briefly, our concern is not so much with data as with the assumptions underlying many of the models already being used. If we consider the fact that at the moment we are making certain assumptions about willingness to pay, which we simply cannot measure, and we simply, the thing is, what we want to do and what the board is asking us to do is to build a model. And we need to build that model on a number of assumptions. Currently, however, there is a lack of data to actually substantiate what those assumptions should be. So at the moment, can we say empirically, yes, our members will likely stop buying at a certain level? We cannot. And Eskom cannot, and no other model can, for a quite simple reason that we haven't reached that point yet. And modeling that empirically is close to impossible because, again, there's a very complicated situation, a new unknown situation occurring in South Africa. If we assume that this product has remained the same, then it is very easy to model. But Eskom's product has been changing in the sense that it's become less reliable, it has become tainted also by public opinion. And so many buyers, many customers who would, if it were a normal generic product, would keep on buying, might now be less willing to buy. And this is a sentiment we've actually picked up in informal conversations and sessions with our members, of which we have many. More and more of our members are interested in being independent from the normal power grid. And so the fundamental problem we're facing in modeling this empirically is, well, no model seems to fit quite well, especially considering these underlying changes in the impact that electricity price increases, instability in the power supply, etc. may have.
We understand that in terms of the models, but we wanted more economic evidence is coming from the customers in terms of checking the facts from them. What are they saying? I understand that perhaps the constraints in terms of where do you go to if you're not getting it further. So it might not necessarily be an indicative of inelasticity, but it is a reality that you have no alternative or an available, reliable supplier that you can turn to if you are not happy with the price. So we just will need some facts around that, just to understand that. That's all that we're asking. Yeah. So you can elaborate on that.
Okay, so to elaborate on that.
No, in writing.
In writing. Oh, I see, sorry. We will do so.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next presenter is the Johannesburg Property Owners and Managers Association. I have the name of Nicholas Barnes. Nicholas Barnes. Do you have Nicholas Barnes? Oh, okay. Will you please raise your right hand, sir? Do you solemnly declare that the facts you are going to provide before this panel will be the truth and the whole truth? Please state your full name and your designation at Johannesburg Property Owners and Managers Association.
My name is Nick Barnes. I'm the chairman of the Johannesburg Property Owners and Managers Association, otherwise known as JSA.
All right, you may proceed with your presentation, sir.
Thank you, Chair. I realise I come at the end of a long stretch for you, the panel, and I'm going to be as brief as I possibly can. This is the 4th year that I've presented here at these public hearings, and in that time we have heard initially Eskom telling us there were no problems and that everything was fine, and latterly, only latterly, we have begun to see the extent to which the problem arises, and it's against that backdrop, I guess, that I wanted to talk to you this afternoon. So, the Property Owners and Managers Association represents well-managed properties in the inner city, in the affordable housing bracket. There are approximately 50 members. There are approximately 50,000 residential units have been brought to the market over the course of the last 15 to 20 years. The rentals in this sector range between 1,700 and 5,500 a month, and the incomes are families that are largely around 5,000 rand to 15,000 rand a month, household incomes. That's the market we're talking about. Fundamentally, the problem that we face is that today, administered costs to this larger of society represent 40% of their total household expenditure. The slide that I wanted to move to was this, and that was to demonstrate through this that effectively when we have modeled over the last 10 years, we've gone back and looked at rent increases, we've gone back and looked at salary increases of organizations operating in a city, and then against that we have stacked the administered costs that have increases. What you can see from the graph is that over a 10-year period, salaries and rent have increased at about CPI, meaning 100% over 10 years. In comparison, the administered costs are now over at 300 odd %, 250 I think for all administered costs, sewage being the greatest, but electricity is a shade under 300%. Now I understand that we are only talking about electricity and Eskom's requests at this stage, but I just wanted to paint the backdrop against which a strata of society is struggling. These are the families, the people that fill our cars, that drive trucks, that deliver goods. They are households who toil every single day, getting to work and from work. And for these people, every cent counts. And it's for these people that I would like to make my plea today. I'm not going to go through vast numbers of graphs and bore you with a lot of the information that you've already had before. But safe to say that this strata of society can take no more. Over the course of the last 10 years, they have borne the brunt of inefficient state, indeed a corrupt state, as it turns out, and this is at every level, from municipal right the way up through to national. I'm not clever enough to understand how we should or shouldn't balance the books and avoid credit downgrades, but what I can tell you is that for the people who live in the inner city, who stay in the buildings that I run, a 15% increase in electricity next year will be catastrophic. They need to find the money elsewhere. The increases should be at CPI, and anything above that that's required should be made up by cleaning house, by improving efficiencies, by getting serious about IPPs. There's a whole raft of other things, but for our tenants, it can't be a 15% increase. And that's all I have to say.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Willis.
I note the presentation was a topic issue for affordability. But when it comes to the presentation that have been made in the previous public hearing, particularly there was an issue around other charges that owners impose on tenants. Just wanted to get your comment around that, because we find that the owners are making life even more difficult by having some kind of fees or markups on the electricity price. Thank you.
Can you respond to that answer?
What has happened over the last 10 to 15 years, and please, my experience is largely within the Johannesburg area, and so that's the background on which I make my comments. But certainly it is true that a vast move indeed from municipalities and from private landlords towards prepaid has happened over the course of the last 10 to 15 years. Indeed, it is true that there are some unscrupulous landlords who are charging excessive amounts. There has been discussion both with Nersa themselves as well as with the municipalities. What has been acknowledged and agreed is that in the instance of an organization, and I cite the company that I work for, Josie Housing, we operate 3,000 odd units in the inner city, and we administer that electricity to that client base and pay the city. And we assume the risk for any defaulted debt and are responsible for downstream supply from the LT group. And in acknowledgement for that, there is a resellers agreement that is in place with the city of Johannesburg. It amounts to about, at the moment, about 11 cents per kilowatt hour, if I'm correct. The view of J. Palmer is that that is the fee that should be charged. So the tariff should be in line with the same tariff that a person would get if they contracted directly with City Power themselves on a prepaid tariff.
Thank you very much for that response, Jen. Mr. Barnes. We thank you for your time, sir. The next presenter is going to be Happy Kambule. Happy Kambule. Mr. Kambule, may you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly declare that the facts you are going to present before this panel will be the truth and the whole truth?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
All right, please state your name and your and the views you are going to present today.
All right, my name is Happy Kambule, and I'm from Greenpeace
Africa and the senior political advisor. I saw that there's a mistake on the program saying that I'm a member of the public, which I am, but I'm here under Greenpeace. Just to start off, to say that it's very rare to have labor, capital in this case, or business, members of the public, civil society, churches, almost everybody saying we can't take an increase. It's very rare that you have all these sectors of society just agree that one particular thing cannot happen or should happen in this case, which is rejecting the increase. So for us, from Greenpeace side, is that you say just determine that it's a 0% increase. There's nothing more to that. We still got to deal with the RCA issue, which is also part of the application, but separate in a sense. But in terms of MYPD 4, just say no. I think it's relatively easy. There are concerns, of course, about what happens when if that determination is made, but I'm sure that we're smart enough to deal with it, whether it's ESCOM, Nersa, or the government. So Greenpeace endorses those similar calls from Life Africa as well as NUSA, that ESCOM does not deserve an increase and should get its house in order. As I said, almost everybody agrees, and in fact, from following what has been spoken about at each and every of these hearings, it's pretty simple. 99.99 further nines and more zeros and nines are saying no, we don't need an increase. Please do not take it on board. In fact, if we look at the application itself, we're looking at the fact that when ESCOM is presenting its information as it interprets the methodology, it doesn't tend to want to give too much specifics on data. For example, in Table 3 and Table 6, it doesn't disaggregate the information that would concern how it's going to recover money. What it does is that it couples the international sales contract or the international contract sales to other countries and the national and the negotiated price contracts together, or negotiated pricing agreements together. And then it separates the STCs. But the STCs, even inside the STCs, you have a situation where the residential class of the STCs is only about 80% of what ESCOM produces or satisfy. So we need a further demarcation between the STCs within each class. And then what we also need is that a disaggregation between the ICS and the NPA. I know this is not new because in 2016, Nersa, you decided that when the RCA is done, there must be a disaggregation between the different customer classes. But that hasn't been done furthermore. It was done once after ESCOM got that verdict from you guys. Furthermore, we feel that the methodology does give, or rather the methodology does not give enough direction to ESCOM, because the interpretation that ESCOM applies in terms of how it apportions the different customer groups is incorrect. As a result, we feel that the methodology must account for the variances in each and every customer group in relation to the proportion that they get service from ESCOM, whether it's from 18% to 20% to 30%. The reason we say this is because we believe that there's an exercise of deception that is occurring, where essentially the residential sector is given the burden, and in most cases, most of the commercial buildings are given the burden of having to claim back or having to pay back amounts of money which could have been recuperated if they were better negotiated contracts with large industrial users. If 18% of your demand is from the residential sector, that means that only maybe 18% of your total income should come from the residential sector and not the bulk of it, which is exactly what's happening right now. So we feel that ESCOM is purposefully misinterpreting the provisions of the methodology. It does not seek to achieve the objectives of the methodology. In fact, I'll go through each of the objectives of the methodology to kind of indicate what has actually gone wrong. In fact, ESCOM has subverted some of the objectives and the purpose of the methodology in order to make sure that in its application it can prop up a failing business model. I'm not the only one saying this, almost everybody is saying this, whether it's from the theoretics, from the analysts, whether it's from normal civil society members, even from labor personnel. The MYPD methodology has objectives, and many, if not all of them, have been bastardized by the application by ESCOM. In fact, if you look at the first one where the methodology is supposed to be ensuring that ESCOM's business is sustainable and limit the risk Anybody you ask here will tell you that they don't feel that their risk has been taken on by Eskom. They will tell you that it is taken by the consumer, largely the residential household. And as you've just heard right now, even further down, when you look at the different classes within society, it's even worse as you move away from the top echelons. In fact, when we look at is the methodology as applied by Nersa and as interpreted by Eskom, is ensuring that there's any reasonable tariff stability and smooth changes over time? The answer is no, because since MYPD 1, maybe that was the last time we had any reason to believe that there's predictability and stability in the price. MYPD 2 was about 25% increase, MYPD 3 was 8% every 5 years, including the different RCAs, and there were other reopeners or little applications that were happening, but there was no stability. The price signal that we had initially had from Nersa was not actually adhered to by Eskom. Eskom kept on coming back, trying to achieve the price path of a 16% increase in MYPD 3. And before that, it tried to achieve the initial application, which was about 25% and above. So we're not finding that the MYPD methodology as it is applied and interpreted is actually achieving its objectives. Moving on. The MYPD objective as well, the third one, is to appropriately allocate commercial risk between Eskom and its customers, and as I said, that's not happening. In fact, the customer is taking all the risk. Even worse is that if the customer doesn't take the risk, the state takes the risk, and if the state takes the risk, that means the normal citizens, the average citizen of South Africa, even those who do not even have electricity, are taking on the risk. In terms of the fourth objective, is that it needs to provide a systematic basis for reviewing of tariff setting, or the basis for revenue and tariff setting. We don't have that right now. We have the process every year, you will see, which we would like to have it maybe once every 3 or 5 years when the MYPD reopens, and then we can have some reprieve, we can take a break, have some coffee, deal with other issues. We've got the carbon tax coming up, we've got the IRP coming up, but every year we have to deal with the same thing all the time. And what it happens is that we do not have any certainty or any confidence in the process that Nersa has created. That this process of the MYPD methodology is actually going to give us any form of certainty and satisfaction in terms of when we engage, because we're coming back to do the same thing every time. It's like Groundhog's Day. It also is there to ensure consistency between price control periods. It doesn't, because last time we had 8% increase, then we had a 2.2 increase. We had a 4.9 increase at one point in time, but then as well, we had a 1 year increase with an RCA, and particularly with this one, which we're doing right now, we're still going to have another RCA that is coming for the later part of the MYPD 3. So basically, there is no consistency. Every year we're going to come back and do the same thing. So I feel like I'm just repeating myself and repeating what everybody else has done. And the last objective is basically to provide efficiency incentives without leading to unintended consequences of regulation on performance. Obviously, I think here it's really about what Nersa has been doing. I think Nersa has not necessarily done its part in this case, because you have to provide the oversight, or rather you have to regulate in such a way that even Eskom cannot wiggle out, and when the consumer is at the other side of the table, the consumer can also not wiggle out. It means that both sides should should be balanced, or should be placed in equal footing as the regulator. And unfortunately, Eskom is a big player, but as a regulator, you should be able to be strong enough to be able to hold them accountable. That when you set a target, they need to meet the target. If you make a determination of 3%, keep to 3%. If it's not efficiently or previously incurred, you cannot claim it back. If we remember back as well, is that during the load shedding of 2009, 2010 and whatnot, the purchases of the OCGT, the gas purchases, we eventually paid for those. There was a reduction in mitigating circumstance, but we paid for those. When it came to light that some of those contracts were irregular and were not done in a good way, we never got any of that money back. It just sat there. it just got back into Eskom's pocket, or it got taken where it had to be taken. But essentially, moving on, the next part of the presentation is really about the real price. We feel that it is fair that Eskom can do an RCA and an MYPD. The information is there, but we would like to have it represented in such a way that we can see the impact of both of them at once. It's not the work of the analysts, it's not the work of any other person who's reading both those applications to marry the two. Eskom should be able to forward a document through Nersa that indicates what that price will be if each and every of those increases were given at the same time. In terms of the MYPD application, again, we feel that in general, Nersa needs to take responsibility for enabling Eskom free rein, and we feel that the tariff application should be rejected. In fact, we've warned Nersa about how it treats Eskom's deliberate intent of undermining the methodology. We first did this during when Eskom applied for a deviation from the MYPD process. Secondly, we did it when the 1-year application was done. We feel that this, again, is one of those moments where Nersa needs to take a stand and say, no, a particular interpretation of the MYPD methodology is X, because now we've gotten to such a point where we understand the practical implementation of the methodology. If that is not the case, then you have to make a judgment or a determination on what needs to happen next. Because what we are getting now is that when we had the 1-year application and what we got right now is the MYPD4 is basically the same set of challenges. In fact, when you look at the economic challenges context, it's more or less the same thing. They even go as far as mentioning that the IRP is not promulgated or is not finalized, so there are a lot of uncertainties. We had mentioned at the time that the IRP is not a major concern anymore because Eskom can still determine what the demand will be. In fact, what we initially had said is that keep to the 2010 IRP because that's what the growth program is right now. Until the update is done, then you can get a new MYPD. But what we are going now is that we had a 1-year application, we've got another application again, and should it happen that the IRP is not finalized, does that mean that we're going to get another MYPD that might be out of sync with the IRP? So we should wait for the IRP. Rather fix on what we get already on the RCA and work from the base of the MYPD as a result of the IRP 2010. In terms of allowable revenue, and I'm about to finish, is that we need to reconcile what's happening with the environmental levy. We're not particularly sure exactly what's going on because in terms of the fossil fuel generated electricity seems to be increasing, but not really increasing as a result of the forecasts because they're playing around with numbers. But it's essentially from last year, they're going to burn more coal in order to build to get electricity. But the environmental levy in the application is far less. And this is about the fossil fuel produced electricity and not the renewably produced electricity. As I said about the MYPD4 and the IRP, I think this whole section should just basically be removed because this is the same challenge that we had when we had the 1-year application. In terms of the subsidies of residential households by Eskom, we're not particularly sure where this comes from. We thought that Eskom was employing cross-subsidization and not essentially subsidizing households through its own revenue. We thought that it was a result of one customer class paying a larger amount so that to subsidize another customer class. So can you please verify that information? Because the way we see it in Greenpeace is that it's actually a fossil fuel subsidy to just continuously underscore the actual cost of fossil fuel-based electricity. And if that's the case, that means that we've been lied to for quite some time, but we do not think that it is at that far, because that is more speculative. So give us an understanding of what this subsidy really is and how it really works. So in closing, we feel that Eskom has been running away from structural problems, and we understand that there were problems, governance problems and whatnot, but we cannot muddy the waters. The first part is that there's an issue around the business model. The second part is that they've got management or whatever problems which are there, which most businesses have. And then there's the problem of supplying us with electricity and affordable electricity. let's deal with the affordable part of electricity, let's deal with giving us electricity in this MYPD application. We don't really want to know about the government's issues, because then what happens in the application is that the very same information that they're using as the challenges becomes the very reason why they want an increase, which is a bit weird. And I think some of you guys who are logic thinkers, you think that there's a fallacy somewhere there, where the question becomes the solution to the question. It can't be like that. So we feel that some of the sections within the application should be removed. Not only do we have a question of the cost of coal and the quality of coal, but we also have now seen that there are problems with maintenance and the style or the manner in which they're collecting revenue, the question around municipal debts, and also the type of contracts that they're awarding, not only to people who are supplying them coal, but also the large industrial users. And we feel that in some way there is an undermining of the true cost of electricity production, so that to continue the business model, hence it is failing. And what this means for us is that ESCOM, as I said, has been lying about its numbers. In terms of one of the reasons why we're here to say no to an increase is that there's a lot of things that are happening around the world which are concerning prices of electricity and or fuels, really key input prices or inputs into economic activity and or well-being. In Zimbabwe, we know what happened. And here in South Africa, we know about one of the last protests that happened in Deep South, where the N14 was closed down. In Bulgaria in 2013, the same thing happened. In France, we're having the yellow vests who are fighting against the increase of fuel. In Zimbabwe, it was fuel. In Bulgaria and in Armenia, it was also electricity. In Moldova, it was also electricity, as well as in Argentina. But what I'm trying to indicate is that there's so much more that people can take. We're going to get to a point where we're going to rebel against, not necessarily ESCOM, but the ones who place ESCOM there. So it becomes a problem of the incumbents or political leaders. It becomes a question of whether or not these people are actually looking out for us. ESCOM is doing its job, it's trying its best, but there's only so much we can take. There's a level, yes, I'm about to finish, I'm finishing this. There's a level which we believe that we're about to get to. And this level is almost close because we cannot afford it anymore. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Campbell, for the presentation. Is there any clarity question? Nothing? All right. Thank you so much. All right. We thank you very much, Mr. Campbell, for the presentation. All right. Just to check for the last time, do we have Tab of Tennis from Civics Outreach Platform? Today's is not here, so we are moving on, and the last presenter of the day is ESCOM, the architect, to respond, and I'm hoping that if you have already prepared a presentation, if you can add the other points from the other stakeholders that presented. Mr. Kassim, do you have any presentation?
Yes, we did say that. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Kassim, just to find yourself and make sure, just to make sure that the oath that you took yesterday is still applicable, just to remind you.
Yes, thank you.
So everything there that you were saying to your colleagues and others there is recorded on all these ones.
Yes.
Thank you. You may proceed.
Thank you. Chair, I'll firstly start on the regulatory clearing account, and then we'll go to the MYPD4 application. Chair, just to get back to the RCA for year 2017, what you will see, the Chair, as we said in the closing yesterday, we've now included the McKinsey recovery of R1 billion to bring it down to the 20.6 billion. But I think the other important factor that was raised was around the potential fraud and corruption and how it relates to the RCA. I think, Chair, firstly, just to highlight that first line item got to do with sales volumes and revenue variance. I think on that item, we believe that there is no significant risk from a revenue variance perspective. Obviously, then the other items are the ones that have a cost attached to them. And that's what we said at the end of the day. When we conclude the investigations, we will then account for it. Here, what is important to highlight here, even in Nersa's decision on the RCAs for years 2, 3, and 4, in that detailed reasons for decisions that they published in December, Nersa did address this issue around fraud and the time it will take around investigations. And in their reasons for decisions, and they put it in each of the respective RCAs, they did highlight in their reasons for decisions that it will take time to conclude on these investigations, and once they've been concluded and quantified, they should be incorporated through the necessary regulatory mechanisms. And just to see the extracts from Nersa's own RCA RFD decisions of last year, Chair, it's that consistent from our perspective with the proposal that Eskom has on the table with regard to fraud and investigations, and that you need for those processes to be concluded and finalized before you can account for it. Otherwise, we are all just making assumptions when we're still going through the process. So, Chair, we believe that Eskom's approach to this RCA is consistent with your own determination of last year. Chair, the other issue that was raised on the RCA, stakeholders have said that we just want big RCAs, and there were elements that we gain an application process. Now, our understanding is that it makes more common sense to recover your revenue on day one through a revenue requirement process, rather than waiting for the time to elapse and for an RCA decision to be made, which is X years into the future. Added to that, we've seen in the proposals, and we've proposed again, there's even a time duration on which that liquidation occurs. So it doesn't make any sense from an Eskom perspective where we want to overstate sales and therefore recover it through an RCA mechanism in the future. So I just wanted to make that point, Chair. Adding to the fact, and we know that the RCA and the methodology does not even account for time value of money. So from our perspective, especially from a sales and revenue element, you want to recover the money in an application mode because it helps to recover your fixed costs as and when it's incurred. Chairperson, the revenue variance is key because it allows us to recover our fixed costs, and if we don't recover it during the decision, during the time in which actuals occur, that is where the risk mitigation mechanism through an RCA mechanism comes into account. And yes, the variable cost has its own rules and it's treated separately. And that's why in the presentation, I don't recall the actual venue, where Eskom demonstrated why we believe when you multiply the revenue variance, you should use the total price and not just the fixed cost component in terms of the recovery of the revenue variance. We were asked the question, but why doesn't Eskom's fixed costs react to the flat sales and declining sales over the last 10 years? At the end of the day, we are guided by an integrated resource plan and government policy. The resource plan indicates what stations Eskom should build, etc. And in terms of government policy, in terms of the requirements, and even in terms of our license agreements around the network businesses. So taking that into account, our assets, and a lot of them are of long-term in nature, it's aligned to what policy and government and our licensing conditions are saying. We cannot just simply drop off large portion of infrastructure if the sales declines in 1 year and then suddenly it increases going forward. And I think, Chair, the same can be applied to some of the fixed costs, in particular when we talk about staff costs. At the end of the day, we have to see what you spoke about the business plan and the strategy and whatever government is working on at the moment. But I think an important point that must come through is that deciding and concluding and implementing the turnaround and strategy, it's not going to happen in the next few months. To implement it and execute it will take time. And if I may quote Mr. Kingston, he said that when we deal with the industry, it's going to take a few years, but we have to deal with the reality now. And the reality now, Chair, Eskom needs to supply the electricity with the conditions and the circumstances and the state of the plant we have and the state of the new build assets to meet the 30,000 or the 35,000 peak demand. And one of the options that are available to us, our understanding of the methodology is based on the environment we're currently working on. Is the decisions we're making prudent for the conditions that exist today? We would all love for the new build to be operating and for the plant to be performing at their design levels. But the reality is we're working with the system and the conditions that face us. And what we have included in our application are the costs it's going to be required to produce this electricity to meet the demand based on our assumptions. Chair, and within this and the conditions, there are agreements and contracts that exist. The coal contracts, the new build contracts, the employee contracts, the settlements we made with the unions, etc. And our outlook on the financials of Eskom is based on what we have available, and that's what the costs are. Chairperson, if I go into
I think it would be helpful maybe just to check check if all the points have been responded to. Mr. Fuller, is it right? All the points have been responded to? Everything has been responded to? Is that what
I think, Madam Chair, if you put it that way, we'll be hoping any points that we ask that have not been responded to will be giving in right.
Yes.
Yeah, but
yes.
they definitely
yes.
have not responded to all.
Yes, yes.
I'm mentioning just those of the stakeholders, the key ones. For instance, there was a proposal from stakeholders that with the irregular expenditure of 19.9 billion incurred in 2017-18 that need to be used to offset the RCA, the ones that key point was made by some stakeholders. And then the other one was the 1 year determination until all the uncertainties are dealt with.
Yes.
So it is, I think it will be fair
yes.
for Eskom to respond to that. Yes. And then, oh yes, the third one that Eskom has not responded to is the risk apportionment, given the cost associated to fraud and corruption. Why is Eskom at this stage, whilst you are not able to determine the quantum, why is it that you are not showing any level of accountability on your part and you are simply transferring the risk to customers? Those are the three key questions that I would respond to.
Chairperson, the 1 year, I've got a slide, we'll deal with that shortly. The 19 billion, as we said in our annual results, Chairperson, irregular expenditure is not necessarily fruitless and wasteful. You've seen the fruitless and wasteful we've disclosed in the financials, and it's less than R1 billion. A lot of it has got to do with administrative issues, where, for example, we didn't have the necessary tax certificates to procure certain supplies and goods. but we did get that service, we did get the value add. So I think on the irregular expenditure, Chairperson, we can also complement this with a written response, but I just wanted to address that. I'll deal with the 1 year in one of the slides, and we'll come back on the risk apportionment in writing. Chairperson, before we get into the MYPD4 application, now at the end of the day, and we make a submission to the regulator in terms of the methodology. And before Nersa issued Eskom's application to the public for commentary and to begin the process, Nersa does its own internal checks and balances to see if Eskom's application was compliant in terms of the methodology. And Chairperson, Nersa did acknowledge after Eskom had submitted both the RCA and MYPD4 that we were compliant, and that was issued in a media statement on the 5th of October 2018. Chairperson, this issue about adjusting the application and is valid during this process. We were responding to a request from the regulatory panel on if you up. Now that things have moved since we've made the application and the assumptions, that's the information and the update we have provided during these hearings. So I think we believe that we are still compliant, and maybe to address the other issue, Chair, that was raised, but Eskom's response to these changes are defective. As I said, we have presented the EAF information and the sales based on the evidence we have, Chairperson, and on that basis we don't believe that the revision is in any form or manner defective. We are confident that we are still compliant in terms of the methodology and the rules. If I move forward, and I think this is the issue that not only Eskom, but I think the Nersa panel has said, we have to work within the confines of the methodology, the Electricity Regulation Act. You've got to assess Eskom's costs for efficiency and prudency, taking into account all the information and the evidence that was supplied. But at the end of the day, the rules also allow that Nersa needs to balance the needs of not only the consumers, but the sustainability of the utility. And that's the tough act that the regulator has to then deal with and take into account. Chairperson, there was a lot of commentary around the regulatory asset base, and we were manipulating it. Now, and some stakeholders have spoken about an independent valuation of the asset base. Just to remind the audience that the valuation from Eskom's perspective is done by an independent person that we submit, and Nersa has the detailed report. So I think from that perspective, and it's Nersa's prerogative to go and do their own analysis review or even do their own studies. But if you look at the value that we've got on the table, and we've shown under generation, and it applies to our network businesses as well, many of those assets are, what, 37 years old. And the amount that disclosed in our balance sheet of around 700 billion, one just had to think of replacing that. You'd expect the number to be much higher and not equal to the 700 billion from an historic cost perspective. The other component, Chair, as we explained in the detailed reconciliation, it's not only about the old assets that are revalued. It's once that valuation is done, what other new assets have come online, and in terms of the regulatory mechanism, what other assets are under construction. And that's the detailed recon we presented, and I think we've done it in writing. If not, we'll definitely do that. But it's not just about the existing assets. There's many other factors that take that into account, plus bringing up to the period in which the application is applicable. I think the other point to highlight, Chairperson, is that at the end of the day, you must take into account the circumstances and at the time when decisions were made from a prudency perspective. Chairperson, I will now ask Blair to just touch on the generation performance. because it was a big theme that was raised throughout the hearings.
Chair, as Mr. Hastings just said, prudency and efficiency needs to be looked at not in terms of perfection, but in terms of the context and the circumstances and the history of how we get where we are. So for me, the key is the context we're in at the moment, and the root cause of that is, as we've stated a number of times, 10 years of running very hard in the red zone of an aging fleet, and the root cause of that is the late decision to allow us to build more capacity, which created the constrained system. Now, yes, in terms of our new build, there are issues, significant design issues, etc., that we explain in detail. But we do expect performance not to be excellent in the beginning of the cycle of plants. We all know about the bathtub curve, so it's not unusual. However, we are addressing these. We have plans that we have shared with this forum in Soweto to look at these issues and to address them. And there was some talk about derating the performance aspect, but it's far too soon to do that. We can look at it in the future, but we expect our plans to get these plants up and running to where they should be. Now, having said this, we are cognizant that although the root cause is that there are other issues, and we really recognize that we're not happy with the current performance. That is why we have the 9-point plan to address these 9 key issues that we've seen. As we already stated in Soweto, the detail of this 9-point plan has been shared with Nersa, the detailed 9-point plan document. And finally, I need to reiterate that despite all of this, generations operating and maintenance costs are in line with international benchmarks. We compared them with IEA, EPRI, as well as an African benchmark, so it's worldwide. Thank you.
Chairperson, yeah, just to move on to where we find ourselves in terms of MYPD4. As we said in the revision, we did not change the revenue requirement. However, dividing the same revenue requirement over a lower sales volume will increase the price of electricity. It is a revenue requirement application, but from a common perspective, we tend to refer to it as a price increase because that's the impact to the consumer. We do acknowledge that. But that was the updated impact of our application, Chairperson, for MYPD4, the three-year horizon. And we did demonstrate this, that when you look at it from an income statement perspective, it reflected the close to 20 billion loss in the first year, followed by 3.6 billion again generating profits, because there were a lot of commentary around the profits Eskom is making. Eskom is not making profits. Now, just to mention to the audience and the panel, yeah, this is based on if Eskom achieved the revenue application. Obviously, Chairperson, there were lots of proposals around inflation, and some even mentioned zero, some even decreases. So if you take into account inflation as an example, and from the 17%, let's say for ease of numbers, if you drop it by 10% on a 200 billion revenue, the bottom line loss will grow by 20 billion. Now, one has to look, Chairperson, around this issue of fixed costs and variable costs. The debt commitments are fixed at the moment, and your depreciation is a function of your assets, and this is now reflected on a historic cost basis for income statement, as I said. So, Chairperson, you really need to look at, again, IBPs we know is a pass-through. So from our perspective, Eskom is not in control of that debt. That's the agreement and the PPAs that are concluded. So you're really looking at primary energy of 87 billion, your employee costs of 26 billion, and and literally dealing with the rear debt and your other operating costs. The sum of that just on OPEX, Chairperson, if I leave out the rear debt, you're looking at about 30, 55, 56 billion rand, and then the 27 on primary energy. Now, just to break even on this revenue requirement, you'll have to take out a significant portion of those elements around primary energy, understanding that many of that is already contractual and committed and fixed. And as I said, you know, if the decision is any lower, it means to get to a break-even position for Eskom will be extremely difficult, and understanding the operational requirements. Ultimately, Chairperson, what we've said at the end of the day is that we know the country needs Eskom, and many of the stakeholders have confirmed that. Yes, we have renewables. They are not supplying the 30,000 megawatts, they are not supplying baseload. If Eskom gets to a situation where we cannot meet our debt service commitments, and it leads to the financial implications of defaulting on our commitments, acceleration of other liabilities, etc., ability to access funding in the future and deliver on the necessary operational and capital requirements will be difficult. It does then put the risk of supply in meeting demand further in jeopardy. And at the end of the day, what it does do to government is that they would have to step in and then take over our commitment. We do acknowledge, as we said, as part of the strategy, that it is a combination of the tariff, it is a combination of Eskom dealing with its own costs, as well as government coming and supporting us, especially from a balance sheet perspective. We know we have to wait those processes to unfold and conclude. And maybe around the cost, Chairperson, as I demonstrated, our coal costs are growing by about 8.5% per annum, and our operating cost was around 3.5%. We know there was comments made around bonuses, and I just want to reiterate, for the financial year we're in currently, this 18-19, Eskom senior management and middle management did not get any bonuses. We paid a once-off payment to the bargaining unit. The senior management got no salary increase. Middle management received an inflationary increase. So we are cognizant of the fact, Chairperson, that we must also deal with our own cost base. If I move on, Chairperson, to this issue around a one-year determination and what does it mean, I think firstly we must acknowledge that we said Eskom's application process takes a number of months. Nersa requires on average about 6 months to make a determination. We must comply with the Municipal Finance Management Act, consult with Southern National Treasury, get their comments incorporated. Before we even start that process, we have to go to the Department of Energy and get their view on IPPs and the outlook thereafter, and then go through our own governance processes. So, Chairperson, what we are highlighting here, if a one-year determination is made, this is our indicative timeline, we would find it very difficult to be compliant procedurally to do another application and for that to be implemented by April 2020. And Chairperson, I think some of the sentiment was around, no, let's wait for the full plan, let's wait for whatever government is saying. And I think Mr. Kingston also said that that's not going to happen overnight. Yes, you may get some direction, but to unpack that, Chairperson, in my view, I think that's going to take definitely a few months, which then just jeopardizes the risk of Eskom following due process. And in terms of the legislative requirements, we can't see ourselves in being compliant to meet a one-year application process. We just wanted to highlight that, Chairperson. And then basically in conclusion, what we presented yesterday, the key points remain. The only additional point I want to address there is Mr. Foley's point of you made an application and your own acknowledgement is that you are 50 billion short for the first 2 years. Yes, we have said it. But we have said in our application is that we see that liquidation of the RCA process and the year 5 RCA helping us mitigate that shortfall. Once you have a decision, we could use that to potentially bridge finance the shortfall in terms of the 50 billion that we did mention in the application, and we know on the revision it went slightly up. So I think that's the only additional point that I wanted to add in terms of what we've said. And maybe just to get back to the first point, Eskom's application does account for IPPs. That in itself is 2%. So if I just look at MYPD 4 by itself, if you're going to stick within the inflation, let's say ceiling of 6%, and you allow for the 2% of IPPs, by implication you're giving Eskom for its own costs only 4%. Chairperson, at the end of the day, like we said, the regulatory clearing accounts, we had to borrow during the actual cycle to deal with these issues. They need to be now paid back, and we cannot postpone the recovery of the RCAs much longer. And therefore, those are the factors that we need to be taken into account when you and your board chairperson makes the decision on the 17-18 RCA application, as well as the MYPD4 application from Eskom. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kassim. We don't have any further clarification. We thank you for the responses. You've done a presentation yesterday. Today you're just doing the highlights in terms of the specific issues to be responded to. We also note that you said with other questions that were asked, you're compiling the information and you'll submit that information in writing for all of those questions.
Sorry.
I thought that I was the in-donor today, but it seems Mr. Officer is trying to take over. That's
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is just for additional information, because I know it's not in your application and we never quite asked you directly. This 20 billion loss that you projecting for this year, can you share with us just on the drivers? Is it expensive use of OGT or CGT? Basically do the breakdowns for us, because that would also give us a picture up to this.
Noting the inconsistencies that you have mentioned, if you can just provide more detail on the line-by-line items of line 10. And then on slide 9, there is the issue of just something that I think can respond to writing later on in terms of your response, because this is a capital-intensive sector with the step changes, and therefore taking into regard also the marginal cost. Therefore, we have a situation where if we bring new assets in, they will be considered as they come into operation. And I understand the butter kind of term that you're talking about, but when we're talking for example 70% availability, really is something outside of the market. And therefore to say, do consider and respond to the question of saying, why not factor in the asset or rata as it comes into being actually useful? Because it means that this particular stage is not useful. It's just something that you can just respond to. It's not useful.
I think basically maybe some of the factors in the prudency guidelines of Nersa, just to take those into account. I think that's also the emphasis from the question from Mr. Kisa. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of these public hearings since we started on the 14th of January, and today is the very last day of our engagements with the public, and having ESCOM along to present its application and providing clarification of its application. From now on, the process will be that Nersa will do the evaluation, the assessment, for those that offered to provide additional explanations within the next 7 days. Please do so, because Nersa will be very much appreciative of that additional input. That also should come from ESCOM, as ESCOM hasn't responded to all of the questions. In terms of the next step from Nersa, it will have to be the final decision, and we're not committing to a specific date at this stage, because we need to do a thorough evaluation, but it has to be before the 15th of March, and this is due to other processes that must follow, and those processes should be in line with the timelines that are prescribed in other legislation. So it will be important that therefore Nersa, the committee perhaps that looks into this matter, to take a decision on the first week of March. There's no specific date at this stage, but also the energy regulator has to take a decision before the 15th of March due to other legal processes and the statutory timelines that we have to comply with. So that is the message from Nersa at this point in time. I would like to then thank you all for being here and for participating in these hearings, and for the questions that you have put to ESCOM and the presentations, including your views and some of the proposed solutions, which we will all take into consideration and do what is required of us in terms of the legislation. Apply all the standards that we are required to apply and come to a decision. I would like to thank our translators, thank the Nersa team, thank ESCOM as well for always coming with your team that is always available and willing to clarify and providing the information that you are capable of providing at that stage. And Nersa will also use its own standard in terms of evaluating the information that has been provided. I would like to thank the energy regulator members of the panel for always being here and assisting in the evaluation at this stage, and also the members of the energy regulator that are sitting here and the external members for your assistance and for listening and taking notes, so that you can remind us should we forget anything, and you do your own assessment and provide us with your views and information. We appreciate that independence as well in terms of observing the proceedings and providing your own views once the committee comes up with its own proposal to the energy regulator. Ladies and gentlemen, the proceedings have come to an end, and we adjourn the public hearing. Thank you very much. Drive safely back home.